Hello and welcome to my new project. Here you can see the rough plan for today's project. Once again, it's going to be a very geometric design, this time with a strong focus on interlaced shapes. I just really enjoy these kinds of projects. And with that, we are already moving on to the wood veneers I'm using this time. For the outer frame, I'm using smoked European oak and American hard maple. Normally, I always work with European maple because it's a lot lighter in color. But this piece of hard maple has been sitting on my shelf forever, so it's finally time to put it to good use. For the inner part, I'm using my favorite wood, Padauk. I really try to include this veneer in every project somehow. The red is just amazing. Along with that, I'm adding American walnut for the second set of rings. For the yellow accents and stars in the image, I'm using moving groove veneer. After finishing, it almost looked golden, such a beautiful highlight. The background will be made of birch veneer, but not the plain type you see here. Instead, I'm using treated birch veneer. I will show you in just a moment how I managed to get this grey tone. To get the birch veneer to take on that color, I didn't use any regular dyes or stains. Instead, I made a natural stain myself, using vinegar and steel wool. I let the steel wool soak in vinegar for several days. Over time, the vinegar turns brown and our homemade stain is ready. Of course, a small jar like this isn't nearly enough to stain a big piece of birch veneer, so I went straight into mass production, mixing up a large batch of stain. Here you can see the large piece of birch veneer I will be using for the background. To fully cover the veneer with stain, I'm using these big plastic tubes. I'm now placing the veneer in the stain for several days to let it absorb the color evenly. Here's the veneer after soaking in the stain for several weeks. I was pretty busy the last few days, so it stayed in there a bit longer than planned. But that's no issue. In fact, it's even better. This way I can be sure the stain really soaked deep into the wood, not just the surface. Now that the veneer is fully stained, I wiped off the excess stain, give it one last rinse with clean water, and let it dry completely. To prevent the veneer from wrapping while it dries, I place it between two boards. The vinegar smell fades pretty quickly once it's dry. And here's the fully stained and dried background. The grey color turned out really even, and the wood grain stands out beautifully. It really gives the whole project a lot of character. Now it's time to cut out a pattern. We are starting with the outer border. I've designed the pattern so that I can use the grid paper as a cutting guide, as you can see here. To cut the veneer accordingly, I stick the grid paper onto it. I roughly sketch the pattern on top. I make sure not to draw directly on the lines of the paper, as those lines will later guide me when cutting. I begin cutting out the individual pieces. The grid paper gives me a high level of precision, without having to measure everything again and again. It also reduces mistakes and makes it much easier to achieve perfect symmetry. Here's the first section I've cut out. To fill the gaps with veneer for the frame, I'm once again using the grid paper. I fix the paper onto the hard maple veneer and use it to cut out the individual pieces. To prevent the tips and corners from peeling off easily, I've reinforced the back of the veneer with a thin layer of wood glue. By the way, I did the same thing with the European oak veneer. Here you can see the finished cut pieces. Now it's just a matter of assembling everything correctly, and of course making sure I don't mess up the pattern. This is where the precision really pays off. The pieces should now fit together with almost no gaps. To make sure the small pieces don't shift during the next steps, I carefully glue everything in place. And here's the completed section. I repeat this whole process until the outer frame is done. Since it's always the same steps, I will just show you the progress with some photos. And here's the finished frame. It took quite a while, but the combination of light maple and dark oak works beautifully together. Now we are moving on to the inner section. As you can see here, this time the pattern isn't based on grid paper, but on isometric paper. I scaled the isometric layout so that the inner design fits perfectly centered. To make sure the isometric paper is placed exactly in the center, I aligned it using the lines of the grid paper. Here you can see the isometric paper in place. I've already transferred the outlines of the pattern. All the orange marked fields will be cut out later. To fill the gaps again with veneer, I'm also using the isometric paper, as you can see here. The process is the same as with the frame, so I will show the progress again through photos. And here's the completed inner section. Now that everything's cut and assembled, we can carefully remove the remaining paper. With that, the entire pattern is now completed. The shapes and the way the veneer colors interact already looks really nice, but once it's pressed, sanded and finished, it's going to look even better. And with that, let's move on. First, we are getting everything ready for pressing. I start by applying veneer tape to the front. Then I carefully remove the masking tape from the back. Here you can see the finished piece, ready to be pressed. During pressing, the veneer is glued onto a base plate using wood glue. A sheet of birch veneer is also glued to the backside. It's important not to use too much glue, so you don't end up with ugly waves later on. I let everything dry overnight to make sure it fully cures. Here you can see the piece after pressing. Everything went smoothly and we end up with a nice flat and even surface. Now it's time to remove the veneer tape. I applied some water to help remove the tape more easily. Here's a piece without the veneer tape. It still looks a bit rough, but once the excess glue is sanded off, the pattern will really start to shine. Before I start sanding, I cut the panel to its final size and veneer the outer edges. Then it's time for sanding and finishing. And with that, the project is finished. I really had a lot of fun with this one. I just love these kinds of geometric patterns. They are super satisfying to make, even if the process can get a bit repetitive at times. The outer frame, made of smoked European oak and American hard maple, turned out great. Now that the finish is on, all the details in the wood really stand out. The same goes for the inner section. As I mentioned earlier, the yellow moving glue veneer looks almost golden with the finish. And the Patuk combined with American walnut works beautifully. The more colorful center contrasts nicely with the darker frame. Also taking the time to dye the birch background gray was absolutely worth it. It gives the whole piece a subtle depth and character you just wouldn't get otherwise. There's something about that tone that really ties everything together. Let me know in the comments what you think of the final piece. And if you want to see more projects like this, feel free to support me with a like and a subscription. Thank you so much for watching and see you next time.